Hu Tao, the cutest crud. She can jump, she can pass through enemies, and she can also be passed through. Hello internet, and welcome to my self-proclaimed most detailed Hu Tao guide, which is the series where I'll overanalyze every aspect of everything, but I'll make it less nerdy. I'll start with some general introductions, then a look at her stats, skills, artifacts, weapons, and finally her team comps. You can use the timestamps I have in the seek or in the description. And also, always remember, I'll be pinning some updates or changes just in case I misspoke in the video, so be sure to check that out. Alright, Hu Tao. She has incredibly high DPS and her bread and butter is basically her charged attacks after her E. I'll explain her constellations and talents as I go. I think you'll understand that way better that way. Let's start with taking a look at her stats. She has the absolute lowest base attack in the game. Yeah, what a way to start. Although the multipliers on her normal attacks are quite decent, her normal attack damage is nothing too high because of the low base attack. She actually has the highest base HP in the entire game though, even more than GeoDaddy. This is very useful for her elemental skill, which I'll explain later. Her ascension stat is crit damage, so you see a lot of high crit damage Hu Taos out there. She actually has the second highest base defense too, at 876, second only to the toughest looking character in the game, which is Chi-Chi. Look at that menacing face. Moving on, let's look at her skill. Her normal attacks is a combo attack that can be performed up to 6 times. While doing the full combo, you actually hit the enemy 7 times in total. Her normal charge attack turns her into a tornado. You probably care about her normal attacks as much as you care about what your high school teacher's fart smells like. I hope you aren't actually interested, but let's move on. Next, we have her elemental skill. Basically, when Hu Tao uses her E, she loses 30% of her current HP immediately. In exchange, her attack is increased based on her max HP. Here's the thing to keep in mind though, when you use this skill, there's no way to actually cancel the animation, and you're not actually invincible too. So it is important to do it in a safe place, or you might just die to her grass again. This happens way too many times for me. After using her E, she loses HP and gains attacks, and she also gets into a state called Parabita Papilio. Sounds like a fancy Russian dish. Just to make things easier, we'll call it butterfly state, which sounds like a rare breed of butter, but pretty much it's butterfly because the moment you use Hu Tao's E, she gets this butterfly symbol thing for a bit. So yeah, butterfly state. In butterfly state, all of her attacks are converted into pyro damage. This pyro effect will not be turned into any other elements by any other characters like Chong Yun's E. The duration of the skill lasts for 8 seconds. After use, the skill will instantly go into cooldown, which lasts for 16 seconds. There's basically 8 seconds of void left after Hu Tao's butterfly mode ends. However, this void is very much non-existent since you are likely going to spend these 8 seconds to use other character's skill to set up for Hu Tao. She practically has no void periods and can consistently become a butterfly and absolutely destroy the enemies. It's worth noting that whenever Hu Tao's HP is less than or equal to 50%, she gets 33% increased pyro damage bonus from one of her talents. So usually you want to use her E, get her below 50% HP, and murder everything except this guy. Slime's too strong, guys. Alright, so that's the basics. There are a lot more to this elemental skill, and it's basically Hu Tao's bread and butter. After using her E, she goes into the butterfly state. The first normal attack gives you about 2 to 3 pyro energy particles. After about 4 to 5 seconds, you get 2 to 3 pyro particles again. I bet nobody will remember this anyway, but yeah, that's about it for normal attacks. As for the charged attacks during the butterfly state, however, this is a huge one. First of all, this is what it looks like. Her attacks during her butterfly state is a lot faster than when she was before. Every time Hu Tao hits the enemy with a charged attack, an effect called Blood Blossoms will be given to the enemy. Enemies that are inflicted with Blood Blossoms will have a flower symbol on their bodies, and this flower symbol does pyro damage to the enemy every 4 seconds. The damage you do with this effect is based on Hu Tao's current stats. Let me explain what that means. If your Hu Tao uses her E, she gains attack based on her HP, and right now she has this much attack. If you use their charged attack right now and apply Blood Blossoms, the enemies here takes this amount of damage from the Blood Blossom. However, if you switch out Hu Tao, she actually loses her butterfly state and loses her attack increase as well. Right now, her stats is back to her original number. And with that, the Blood Blossoms will do less damage since it is based on Hu Tao's current stat line, which since Hu Tao has already cancelled out her butterfly state, she has lower stats. This basically means you want to stay in with her during her butterfly state for as long as possible. Blood Blossom lasts for 8 seconds from the moment it is inflicted. The 8-second duration can be refreshed by hitting the enemy again with a charge attack. You're basically repeatedly inflicting blood blossoms before it even ends. However, you can still only trigger the blood blossom damage once every 4 seconds, so there's no worries there. Based on that, you'll be able to make a blood blossom that lasts for a total of 16 seconds if you've inflicted once when you enter butterfly state and once when it's about to end, since it refreshes the duration. A 16 seconds blood blossom will do pyro damage to the enemy once every 4 seconds, for a total of 4 times if you do it correctly. Basically, try and make sure your Hu Tao does a charge attack once you get into butterfly state and once before it ends to maximize the damage. Even as you can see on the screen, her charged attacks in butterfly state freaking slaps. So it is important to maximize the amount of charge attacks that you can do, and you can do that with a method called animation cancelling. As the name suggests, you cancel out the animation that does not matter. There are 2 main ways of doing this. One is a bit faster but a lot trickier, and one is just a bit slower but a lot easier. The fastest one is performed by using a backdash. Here's how to do it. Use your E and do a charge attack. The moment you see this sharp, kinda offensive looking fire spear, do a backdash instantly. You can really dash towards any directions, but usually you want to keep hitting the same enemy, hence why the backdash. You could do a front dash, but for some reason Hu Tao is the only character in the game that can completely pass through the enemy with her dash, so you won't be able to do that too well. After doing a backdash, do another charged attack, and now repeat the process. This is theoretically the way to make Hu Tao hit the most charged attack with the fastest speed, but of course it is susceptible to human error first of all. The perk of doing this is that you will do some unbelievable damage because of how quick you're using your charged attacks, and you'll also get a lot of invincibility frames because of how much you're dashing. The cons of doing this, however, is that you'll be wasting stamina while you're doing it. It gets even worse if you don't have Constellation 1 on Hu Tao, since that allows Hu Tao to not spend any stamina with her charge attack in her butterfly state. If your Hu Tao is Constellation 0, you usually would perform the other animation cancel instead, which is the easier version. Even if you have C1, you should also master both versions just to use them suitably. Another problem with this type of animation cancelling with the backdash is with how Genshin's targeting works. If you mess up a bit, you might sometimes end up switching enemies after the dash, and you'll likely end up looking lost with Hu Tao facing you instead of the enemy. Looking just as lost. The easier animation cancel to perform is like so. First, get into your butterfly state. Next, do a charged attack instantly. Just like before, the moment you see this sharp, kind of offensive looking fire lance appear again, do a jump. This is a tad bit slower than dashing backwards and charge attacking again, but it comes with a lot of perks too. If you use this method, your targeting will always be on the same enemy, since you start right where you jump and you'll usually jump right when you hit the enemy. This makes it so you won't randomly target another enemy or go out of target range. Another perk that this has is that it saves you a lot of stamina. Jumping costs 0 stamina, so you basically get more freedom to dash away. The drawback would be that it has less invincibility frames since you won't be dashing, and also it's also just a tad bit slower. There are a lot of debate regarding which animation cancel works best, but I'd have to say you should get used to both of them, manage your stamina well, and use them at the right time, no matter if you have a C0 or a C1 Hu Tao. Phew, that was long, but anyways, moving on, we have her elemental burst. Hu Tao does a circular spin, and the enemies that gets hit by it takes pyro damage. For every enemy she hits, she recovers health. This can trigger up to 5 total enemies, equivalent to 5 heals. Note that you can still hit over 5 enemies, they'll all still take damage, but you can only heal to the amount equivalent of hitting 5 enemies. If your HP is below 50% while using this skill, both the healing and damage increases. Do note that this AoE attack has a pretty short range, so make sure to stay closer to the enemies before using it. Phew, that was short. But anyways, we'll be taking a look at her artifacts. Her best artifact choices are the 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flame set and 4-piece Shimenawa Reminiscence set. If you don't have good 4-piece sets, you can use 2-piece Crimson Witch and 2-piece Wondrous Trope. 4-piece Retracing Bully can also be used, but it will not be as good as the other two. Crimson Witch of Flame set has always been set as the best set for her. 2-piece gives her pyro damage and 4-piece gets her even more pyro damage, and of course more vaporize and melt damage. However, after some actual galaxy brain math done by the community on Hoyo Lab, it is found that Shimenawa Reminiscence will deal a bit more damage overall as compared to the Witch set. If you don't know, 4-piece Shimenawa Reminiscence set drains 15 energy from a character after they use their elemental skill. In exchange, the wielder is granted 50% damage increase for their normal charge and plunging attack for 10 seconds. There are debates regarding these two artifacts, but I will still recommend the 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flame set since the overall damage margin is not that high and that 15 energy could come in clutch for Hu Tao since it could heal her up. To put things simply, go Crimson Witch set if you like to play safer, and Shimenawa set if you want to risk having less chance to use your heal for more damage output. They are both very solid sets for Hu Tao, no doubt. Do note that you must have 4-piece Shimenawa set if you're going for that. 2-piece set don't really help Hu Tao too much because of her low base attack. As for the main stats, Hu Tao will be needing a HP% main stat Sans, Pyro damage goblet, and a crit rate or crit damage circlet. For the circlet, use the circlet with the main stats that you lack. A very solid Hu Tao will likely have 50% crit rate and 260 crit damage. Do note that if you don't have any HP% main Sans, it's actually better to give her Elemental Mastery Sans instead of attack percent due to her very low base attack. In terms of priority, the substats you're looking for will be firstly crit rate or crit damage, and then HP%, and then Elemental Mastery, and then flat HP, and then only attack percent. Always remember that attack percent is not that great on Hu Tao. She actually has less base attack than Gosh darn Barbara. Moving on regarding her weapon. Without a doubt, Staff of Homa will be the best in slot. The next in slot will be Primordial Jade Spear, and then Dragon's Bane. If you don't have any of these, I'd like to shine the spotlight on my guy. My comrade in arms, the man, the myth, the legend, Black Gosh darn Tassel. This thing that always haunts me during my summoning sessions is actually solid for Hu Tao because of the HP% stats that it brings. I know, unbelievable. Now that you've understand what Hu Tao does and what she needs to have, we can finally take a look at the team comps. Hu Tao's comp is very versatile. The most generic one consists of Hu Tao, Xing Qiu, Zhongli, and Flex. Even Zhongli can be replaced, but the most important duo is Hu Tao and Xing Qiu. You cannot separate these two if you are looking for the highest damage possible. The reason behind this is that Hu Tao can keep triggering reverse vaporize when paired with Xing Qiu. Now, most people would move on after listening to that reason, but I'm painfully extra, so I'll explain this crud. Even if you're a veteran in the game, you might not know this, so I'd suggest giving it a listen. For newer players, you gain more understanding on how the game really works, so yeah. For this section, I'll be answering this one question. Why can't Hu Tao keep on triggering reverse vaporize with Xing Qiu? The easy answer is, well, Xing Qiu applies Hydro very quickly. But there's actually more to it. Firstly, you'll have to understand how element application work. In order to trigger a reaction, you need to apply 2 elements on a single enemy. But you can't actually apply elements with the same skill constantly. Here's what I mean. Say you have Klee and you're facing this Anemo boss that constantly has the element of Anemo on it. You can use a normal attack, and this normal attack applies Pyro on the enemy with Anemo. This causes a swirl reaction. However, if you hit it again with another normal attack, most people would think the same thing happens, but it is not. As you can see, Klee's second and third attack does not apply Pyro, nor does it trigger the swirl. Based on these examples, we can understand that element application has a cooldown. Based on this logic, Hu Tao should not be able to apply Pyro constantly since it has cooldown. So why can't she still vaporize constantly? Take a look at this. I used Klee's normal attack. I applied Pyro and triggered the swirl. I switched to Diluc and used his E. And there you can see, I successfully applied Pyro and triggered another swirl. Based on this, we can conclude that element application from the same skill has cooldown, while elemental reactions don't actually have any cooldown at all. Here's another way to confirm this. I used Aloy's charged attack and her E. As you can see, I applied Pyro and triggered swirl on both times, even though I'm using the same character. Basically, if you want to constantly cause elemental reactions, you have to constantly apply certain elements. The way to constantly apply elements is by applying them with different skills, instead of just doing one skill quickly. This actually only answers half of the initial question I mentioned. But anyways, it's not just because Xing Qiu's blaze that spawns from above is really quick, but it's also because that he applies Hydro with 2 different skills usually. The floating, spawning Cool-SL swords and the swords around you that you get after using his E. These 2 skills both applies Hydro. So no worries of any Hydro application going on CD for each of these skills since they cover for each other. For an elemental reaction to happen, Hu Tao here will have to constantly apply Pyro too, or else the reaction will not happen. Here you can see a normal Hu Tao charged attack, and here you see her hitting a target with Hydro applied. As you can see, Hu Tao has triggered Vaporize on both her first attack and her Tornado charged attack. This means that Hu Tao has applied Pyro on her normal attack and her charged attack, which means that normal and charged attacks are considered different skills, which is why you can apply Pyro twice in succession. If you use normal attacks only, you will only trigger one Vaporize, and after about 2 to 3 seconds, you can trigger it again. This is one of the reasons why Hu Tao can keep on triggering the Vaporize. She has 2 skills applying Pyro while Xing Qiu has 2 skills applying Hydro. So there's no cooldown with applying an element since they cover each other with 2 different skills, and they can keep on applying Hydro and Pyro that way to perform the Vaporize. I also mentioned this was only one of the reasons because there is another. For you to understand that reason, you'll have to understand how elemental reactions work. Most people think it's simple, where vaporization happens when fire meets water or the other way around. But there is actually more to it. Firstly, there are 2 types of Vaporize. The normal Vaporize and the reverse Vaporize. The normal Vaporize is triggered if you first apply Pyro and then trigger it with Hydro. The reverse Vaporize is triggered if you first applied Hydro and then applied Pyro. The difference between these is that normal Vaporize has a 2 times multiplier while the reverse Vaporize has a 1.5 times multiplier. The question now would be, why don't we all just use the normal Vaporize? It has higher numbers anyway, right? The reason is that you cannot trigger normal Vaporize that often. Sit back and relax, we're in for a long ride. So why can you not trigger normal Vaporize often? It is because of the ratio of Pyro to Hydro is actually 2 to 1. I don't want to include too many numbers because they're confusing as heck, but basically, Hydro is strong against Pyro. You know, super effective. This means that one single value of Hydro element can cancel out 2 values of Pyro element. For simplicity's sake, just look at this clip. Here, Klee inflicts Pyro with her normal attack. You can understand this Pyro with a value of 2. So, 2 Pyro. Now, Barbara inflicts Hydro with her normal attack. You can understand this Hydro with a value of 2, so 2 Hydro. Since 2 Pyro cancels out only 1 Hydro, as you can see after Barbara triggered the normal Vaporize, the Pyro disappears completely. What about reverse Vaporize? Here we have Barbara applying 2 values of Hydro. Then Klee here applies 2 values of Pyro and triggers the reverse Vaporize. What happens here is that the enemy still has 1 value of Hydro, since 2 of Klee's Pyro cancelled out only 1 value of Hydro. While the enemy has 1 value of Hydro, you can still trigger another reverse Vaporize. As we said before, element application with the same skill has a cooldown. So as long as you use another type of skill that applies Pyro, you can trigger another reverse Vaporize. So combining all of that info, Xing Qiu has 2 skills that keeps applying Hydro. Hu Tao has 2 skills that keeps applying Pyro. But for every 2 values of Pyro that Hu Tao inflicts with both her normal and charged attacks, she can only cancel out 2 values of Hydro in total. And Xing Qiu with the water swords around him and a constant barrage of spawning machine gun swords can constantly reapply Hydro the moment it disappears. And there you have it. The perfect pair that allows constant reverse Vaporize, which can easily outdamage a normal Vaporize damage over time because of how often it happens. If you think about it, it makes sense how a normal Vaporize would have 2 times multiplier while a reverse one would have 1.5. The ratio between the elements causes that to be the case. And there you have it. This is truly why Hu Tao is so strong with Xing Qiu. And now that we understand the main mechanics of this comp, the 3rd slot can be Zhongli, which is the best shielder in the game, or just any other shielders actually. The final slot can be anyone, but each will result in a slightly different playstyle. This will usually be the rotation of the basic Hu Tao, Xing Qiu, Zhongli comp. Zhongli uses his shield. Do note that it is better that you don't position the pillar too close to the enemy because the pillar can sometimes react with Xing Qiu's Hydro element and you'd end up with Hu Tao not being able to Vaporize. Next, move closer to an enemy, and as you do, Zhongli's shield decreases elemental resistance of the enemies. Now Xing Qiu can use his burst. Do note that it is best to save his E for when Hu Tao's butterfly state ends. Next, Hu Tao can go, use her E, and do as much charged attack as possible with various animation cancels. Once the butterfly state ends, switch Hu Tao out to Zhongli or Xing Qiu. Use their skills to recharge or just nuke with a planet, I guess. You can basically repeat this process over and over again and see enemies fall on their knees. Zhongli can be replaced with Thoma and Diona. Thoma helps with damage too with Fervent Flames, but he sometimes steals Xing Qiu's Hydro from Hu Tao. Diona doesn't help too much with the damage since she can out-heal Hu Tao, but it could come in clutch, you never know. So yep, Zhongli is still the best in slot. For the 4th slot, here are some characters you can think about. Kazuha, Sucrose, Xiangling, Bennett, Keiya, Ganyu, and Albedo. Using them each has their own perks and their own playstyle. If you're using Kazuha or Sucrose, you want to start with Hu Tao's ult. Trigger a sword with Kazuha or Sucrose so you get a 4-piece very distant effect, then go with the usual cycle. If you're using Xiangling, it's a bit weird because Xiangling almost always steals Xing Qiu's Hydro element away from Hu Tao. So you'll be reverse vaping with Xiangling a lot rather than Hu Tao. Regardless of it, if you have a well-built Xiangling, it is still pretty strong. If you're using Bennett, he gets your more attack of course, but he sometimes overheals Hu Tao. You can prevent that by giving less HP on Bennett, so yeah, it's still viable for sure. If you're using Keiya, he gets his ult very often, so you get to freeze freeze the enemies with Xing Qiu's Hydro applicating, and then do melt damage with Hu Tao. The melt damage is high, but you won't trigger it as often due to the ratio between Pyro and Cryo. You can probably figure out why. So yeah, Hu Tao and Xing Qiu can still do pretty good damage to rival a comp with Kaya, unless you have a seriously insane Kaya build. If you're using Albedo, you basically want to just use his skills and ults to get yourself Elemental Mastery. And if you pair him with Zhongli, you also get the double Geo Element Resonance effect. After almost finishing the video, I only realized I forgot completely to talk about the Constellation. But I would say pretty much the C1 is absolutely very valuable. No matter if you're like a free-to-play or a whale, you should absolutely try and get that. I would suggest that unless you're someone who has some serious cash to burn, or else you should never go for a C6 on any character, unless of course you can manage it. And in the case of Hu Tao, every constellation that she gets actually helps with, you know, dealing more damage. I would say her C6 is a bit weird because of the trigger condition involves kind of you dying, so that's not gonna happen too much. But hey, if it does happen, then good for you. You're gonna do more damage too. Well, not more damage, just you get more crit, so overall over time you'll still do more damage than anyone else. And that is my overly detailed guide for Hu Tao. Making this video made my butt sweat and my spine hunched. Let me know if this was helpful. Good luck with building Hu Tao, and take care.